October 1931. Adolf Hitler sits across from the President of Germany for the first time. Paul von Hindenburg, 84 years old, listens to the leader of the fastest growing party in the country make his case. And when Hitler leaves, Hindenburg turns to the general who arranged the meeting and delivers his verdict. This Bohemian corporal, as he calls Hitler, might make an adequate minister of posts one day. Chancellor of Germany, never. 15 months later, Paul von Hindenburg swears Adolf Hitler in as Chancellor of Germany. But because Hitler looks like the defining archetype of the military dictator, what many people do not realize is that Hitler did not come to power through a coup, or as they like to call it in Germany, a putsch. He had, of course, tried to use the way of the coup a decade before this meeting with Hindenburg, but that failed, was imprisoned, had been released, and he had decided to go the legal way. But none of what happened in the 15 months between the first meeting and becoming Chancellor is what anyone would expect. Every month produced more dramatic turn of events than the previous one. But much of the machinations were successful because of the steps laid in the years Hitler's release from prison and even before that. Start with the first lie that made all of it possible. In November 1918, a British general named Neil Malcolm was having dinner with Erich Ludendorff, one of the top military leaders of Germany in the First World War and High Command's real strongman, who always complained that the civilian government back home had failed the army. Trying to sum up the general's rambling point in a single sentence, Malcolm asked him, "Do you mean, General, that you were stabbed in the back?" Ludendorff's eyes lit up. The idea of the stab in the back was fraudulent from its conception because Ludendorff himself had begged for an armistice weeks earlier, telling his own government the war was militarily lost. But the myth didn't need to be true. It needed only to be believable to millions of humiliated Germans looking for someone else to blame, and Hitler, the young corporal recovering from a British gas attack in a military hospital, was one of the millions who believed it instantly and completely. The German army had not been defeated in the field, is how Adolf Hitler liked to put it. After his recovery, he arrived in Munich in September 1919 as a spy for the army. His job was to check out an obscure club calling itself the German Workers' Party, one of 100 such fringe groups sprouting in the wreckage of the old empire. The army would send spies to these meetings. One night, he sat through a meeting of maybe 25 men in a beer hall back room, but the meeting was unremarkable, and he had already begun leaving when a supposed professor in the audience proposed that Bavaria secede from Germany. Hitler stood up and tore into him so violently that the man reportedly fled the hall like a wet poodle. A locksmith named Anton Drexler, the club's real founder, chased Hitler down afterward and pressed a pamphlet into his hands. Hitler was in a few short weeks enrolled as a member of what would become the Nazi Party. Within a year he'd taken over its propaganda wing, and night after night he packed out Munich's largest beer hall for rallies. By the summer of 1921, while he was traveling in Berlin trying to build outside contacts from his familiar territory of Munich and Bavaria, the committee back home decided he'd grown too dictatorial and tried to merge the party with a rival group to dilute his influence. Hitler raced back to Munich and offered his resignation to the party leaders, betting on his knowledge that the party couldn't survive without its only real speaker and its biggest source of donations. So when the leaders objected to the resignation, he now demanded absolute personal control of the party no committee. Drexler and the others fought back with a pamphlet accusing Hitler of a lust for power and personal ambition, of using the party as a springboard for his own immoral purposes. They weren't wrong, but it didn't matter. Hitler sued them for libel and forced Drexler to publicly disavow his own pamphlet and had the party statutes rewritten to abolish the committee altogether. Drexler was initially moved from his leadership details and given an honorary title and was subsequently erased from the history of the party. The wider context of Germany's legal structures, like many governments of today, was completely compromised. Weimar Germany's courts were reliably lenient toward right-wing violence and merciless toward the left, after the murders of the Catholic politician Matthias Erzberger in 1921 and the Jewish foreign minister Walter Rathenau in 1922 by men of the extreme right for their attempts to make the peace treaty work. They got light sentences or quiet help escaping. But when the Spartacist rebels attempted a left-wing coup, which was crushed in 1919, over 700 people were charged with treason. Hitler had come to learn in his new political career that violent revolution from the right wing carried almost no legal risk. In the fall of 1923, Bavaria was still administered by an unofficial triumvirate: Gustav von Kahr, a state commissioner, General Otto von Lossow, commanding the army in Bavaria, and police chief Hans von Seisser. Hitler needed them, or needed to force them to be on his side, because he'd learned in his Vienna years that a revolution needs the cooperation of existing power, and he already knew these men were defiant of Berlin and were flirting with the idea of a coup when he heard Kahr had scheduled a speech at the Bürgerbräukeller beer hall on the evening of November 8th, with Lossow and Seisser both expected in the audience. Hitler saw his chance to trap all three in one room. At 8:45, with Kahr 30 minutes into his speech to about 3,000 in the beer hall, Nazi stormtroopers ringed the hall, and Hitler pushed to the front, jumped on a table, and fired a pistol shot into the ceiling. "The national revolution has begun," he shouted. He claimed the barracks were occupied and the army and police already marching under the swastika. None of it was true yet. But nobody in the hall knew that. He marched Kahr, Lossow and Seisser gunpoint into a side room. It didn't work. All three men sat in silence, unmoved, until Hitler rushed back into the hall and lied to the crowd that the triumvirate had already joined him in his stealing of power. All three slipped away the moment they were out of Hitler's sight, and by the time Hitler led a column of 3,000 marchers into central Munich, the army and police were waiting for him. Shots were exchanged and 16 Nazis and 3 policemen lay dead within a minute. Hitler dislocated his shoulder diving for the pavement in the shootout, and just like that, the beer hall putsch was over. But that wasn't the end for National Socialism, as would have been for almost any other party in this position. But it was the beginning of the lesson that would put Hitler into chancellorship less than a decade later. The trial for high treason against Hitler for the attempted coup opened on February 26, 1924, with a compromised judiciary and a Bavarian justice minister who was an old friend of Hitler. He was allowed to interrupt at will, cross-examine anyone and speak for as long as he wanted. The putsch and trial that should have ended him instead made him a national figure for